and welcome to another Down the Rabbit Hole video. We're rounding off the final videos about the Star Wars spaceship toys, and we're going back to the villains this time, the TIE Fighter. This is the standard TIE Fighter, not Darth Vader's and not the TIE Interceptor, just the workhorse of the Imperial fleet, the standard Imperial TIE Fighter. Now, I always thought this ship was a very strange design. I mean, especially when you consider the X-Wing and the Y-Wing looked kind of like real airplanes, and even comparing it to contemporary vehicles like the ships you see in Battlestar Galactica, the TIE Fighter's got a really strange design. This double paneled thing with a ball in the center. It's so unusual if you really think about it. It doesn't look like any kind of actual aircraft. Well, no, that's not entirely true. The central ball area is actually based off a ball turret that's used in a B-17. I'll show a couple of images of what that looks like, and it's very close to what we see on the TIE Fighter. Now, with the TIE Fighters themselves, and I'm picking this up rather gingerly, and I'll tell you why in a second, I always thought this was such a strange design. I mean, it's so cool, and it's so iconic to the Star Wars films now that we just sort of take them for granted. This is the late 70s toy TIE Fighter, and I believe this was the first vehicle I ever saw. My family were down in some part of the US, I think Oregon, and we went into a toy store and I saw not only this, but the X-Wing, which, trust me, we're getting to the X-Wing eventually. And I think I saw this one first, and I didn't even recognize what it was at first because it's such a different looking vehicle. And it's so different from what it looks like in the films, and I'll get to that in a second. But it was only because there was a character, a little, I think it was on the cover art, I think it was Darth Vader sitting with his head out, that indicated to me, oh, these are Star Wars toys. Oh, wait a minute. And I had already started to collect the figures. So when I saw this in its box, I don't have the box anymore, unfortunately, I was really intrigued. And then, like a couple of rows over, then I saw the X-Wing as well, and I was just in heaven. I thought, oh, I got to get these toys. These are fantastic. So, got the TIE Fighter, and very, very happy with it. But it's not accurate to how it looks in the film on a couple of different levels. Now, we'll get to that momentarily. I just want to talk about the toy itself. Again, I'm very careful to pick this up, and the reason why Kenner, I think, decided what would be really cool for kids is to have it so that, of course, the villains are going to lose, so they would make it possible for the TIE Fighter's wings to fly off really easily. And as the decades have rolled by, and we're talking nearly 40 years now, the mechanism that makes these wings fly off happens very rapidly, and it's almost happened a couple of times just in recording this video. Essentially what you do, there's a couple of triggers right here. I'll even carefully zoom in. You can just see there's like a little button you would push there, and it causes the wings to fly off. In fact, let me demonstrate. There you go. One destroyed TIE Fighter. This is actually rather opportune because it actually allows me to show you the central ball area, which again, B-17 ball turret right there. I mean, you can just see the comparison. And you can very easily open her up, put your action figure inside, and, oops, close it up properly. And yeah, great little toy. So how are these toys not accurate to the film? Well, I guess the best thing I can do is show what a figure looks like standing beside them. There was an AT-AT pilot made, and he's kind of similar. As you can see, if he was standing beside a TIE Fighter, he's pretty close. I mean, he'd have to stoop down just to get below the ball here. And that looks fine here, but when you consider what these actually look like, especially the height of the wings in the movie, there's no way he'd be doing that. I'm going to cut to another picture of another toy now that shows essentially this layout here with wings on a TIE Fighter toy that are much closer to what they would have really been like in the film. Similarly to the size of the wings, I always wondered exactly what color are they? This toy is white. I mean, very, very white. And I do like the grid pattern of the solar panels. It looks quite stark and very dramatic. I think they really did a good job. But as you saw in that last picture of that toy, that ship looked almost blue. And I think the original model for the TIE fighter was blue in color. Certainly the prototype was, anyway. I'm going to show you two pictures here. One is what the prototype for the TIE fighter looked like back in the mid-70s when they were proposing what the different ships would look like. And also a second picture of the TIE fighter, that same TIE fighter prototype model with an Imperial Star Destroyer prototype behind it, and look very closely at what color it is. The first image is a black and white image, but look at the second picture. Look at what color that TIE fighter is. Now, when we first see the TIE fighters in the movie, they look like this. If you ask me, that looks like a sort of a grayish color almost. But from what I gather, the TIE fighter model was itself blue, and they had to lighten it up because the blue of the ship was not working well with the blue background of the blue screen technology they were working with at the time. So think for the original version of Star Wars, the TIE fighters came across as a very pale grayish color. And that's why the toy was, I think that's why the toy was made in this whitish color. I guess either that or Kenner were being kind of economic with their plastic, and they just thought, well, the X-Wing is in white, so we're doing the TIE fighter in white as well. Now, this is going to sound strange, but there are two connections for me personally with this toy and video games. The first immediate connection is when I was playing with these Star Wars toys as a kid, I found it impossible to make the TIE fighter sound. And there's a reason for that. I will play for you now what the engines of a TIE fighter sound like. Okay, so you're a kid running around in your backyard with your friend flying an X-Wing, and you're trying to chase him in your TIE fighter. How exactly are you supposed to make that noise with your throat? I think I ended up just yelling a lot, and people thought I was having a tantrum. I'm like, no, I'm making the TIE fighter sound. So I was very glad when video games came along where you could actually have fun with TIE fighters in the games, and you didn't have to try and replicate that sound with your voice. The other connection is, ironically, even though the TIE fighter is the villain, it's the main starring role and the name of probably one of the best Star Wars flying games ever made. There was a series in the mid-90s of X-Wing for your early DOS machines, etc. on the PC. Loved that game. And then they made a couple sequels, one of which was TIE Fighter, where you actually play for the Empire. And it is to this day a highly regarded game, probably one of the best of all Star Wars flying games ever made. So, there you go. For such a humble little ship, it is actually the namesake of one of the best Star Wars games there is. Now, to get back to how inaccurate this size is with this little figure, I find it interesting. I have seen some of the trailers for the newest Star Wars Rebels Season 2, I think they're up to now. And it's strange. I know that the Star Wars Rebels TV show is kind of going for an exaggerated, cartoony kind of a look. But I find it very interesting that the TIE fighters that show up in Star Wars Rebels actually have these short little wings like this toy does. Here's a couple of images to show you what I mean. Now, I've been mostly holding up this TIE fighter, which is my original, and I happen to know that because you can see here the lousy job I did of applying the stickers. So I've always known that's my TIE Fighter because it's got that bad application there. This other one I believe belonged to my brother, or it might have been a friend was getting rid of it because it was broken. And it turns out the reason it was broken is the wings would just never stay on. Now, this does stay on if I give it enough, if I apply enough pressure to it. What I ended up doing for this one was I wrote to Kenner way back in the 70s. You could actually write to toy companies and they would send you replacement parts. And I asked them, because this is one of the first times I ever took a toy apart. And I'm talking like 10 or 11 years old, well, probably 12 years old at the time. But I undid these screws and I lifted this top part off. And I noticed that the trigger that keeps the wing flying off to do that sort of action is really just a little piece of plastic. Like this trigger piece here is really no more than a hook that holds that spring in place. And if you push the button down, the hook unconnects from here. This flies off because there's a spring. So I asked Kenner if they would send me some replacement button pieces or these pieces that go in here. And they did. That's in fact what you're looking at. But you can't really tell. They sent me gray ones, I think, for the Darth Vader TIE Fighter. So I actually painted those white by hand and stuck them in there. So that's how I know this is that other TIE Fighter that I'm pretty sure belonged to a neighbor's kid, or I can't remember who it was, but it was broken and I fixed it. I was very proud of that. And of course I've been doing this for all the other vehicles in this series, so why is it called a TIE Fighter? See? It's a pair of ties. No, actually I'm kidding. The reason it's called the TIE Fighter is it's actually got something that is not actually crazy science fiction. On the back, now this is again a little different because this is holding the battery pack. The original model just didn't have this part that sticks out, but there were a couple of dots and I think they've extended them here. These were considered twin ion engines. And that's a real thing that NASA has actually proposed. Various rocket scientists have actually proposed to make ion engines a method of propulsion for real vehicles in space. The downside is ion engines would, I can't remember, I read up on it once, but they would only give out a very small amount of extra energy for the amount of energy that they consume. So you would have a very slow-moving vehicle if you actually had an ion engine on your spacecraft. So for it to be used on a very, very quick darting around fighter for the Imperial fleet doesn't really make much sense. And another little anecdote about myself and TIE fighters and video games. I used to be a member of an online club that would play X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, where we'd all choose our ships and we'd go in and do a little dogfighting, and occasionally we'd just have one-on-one matches just to try each other's skill on things. And I actually developed a neat little pattern of how to use the TIE Fighter in a way that was actually quite challenging for the opponent. And I used to enjoy seeing how did the person selecting their X-Wing or their B-Wing even, they would see me choose a TIE Fighter and they would laugh each time. And then quite often, well, maybe a good 60-70% of the time, I would actually end up defeating them, and they were aghast. How did I do it? Well, I don't know if I can do it with this model because it's probably, or this toy, the wings will probably fly off. But imagine you're coming at me. In fact, let's use this fella as if he was the ship coming toward me, and I'm in my TIE Fighter. Rather than just flying straight toward him, what I would do is actually spin in a circle, causing him to have to always line up his shot. Now, I can't really do it justice, but essentially with the joystick, I would just really, really lean on it and spin in a circle. So I was this corkscrewing fighter coming in toward him. And it made me laugh every time somebody would curse my name because I was in a lowly TIE Fighter and I defeated him. So yes, I have great fond memories of the TIE Fighter, even though it's the bad guy. And yes, thousands of them were destroyed throughout various movies and video game depictions. The lowly little TIE Fighter, it's kind of an unsung, not hero and not villain either. I think it's an underrated little ship. And it looks completely distinctive. I mean, there is nothing else in science fiction that even remotely resembles a TIE fighter. You could draw parallels between the Battlestar Galactica Viper and the X-Wing. That's quite simple to do, and some of the ships in Buck Rogers even. But nothing looks like a TIE fighter. So, cheers to the TIE fighter. I think it's definitely a lesser recognized, unique ship that really, truly deserves its place in the Star Wars vehicle history books. So this, of course, means that there's only one video left. That's the X-Wing, and that's going to be a very special video for me. So until that time, I'll see you down the rabbit hole.